You belong in a nursing home, they said while I was still grieving. My daughter-in-law's voice was calm when she said it. Not raised, not angry, almost practical. My son didn't stop her. He didn't even look at me. He just kept eating. I didn't answer. I folded my napkin once, slowly. Then I placed it beside my plate and stood up. I'm glad you're here. Stay with me until the end of my story and tell me where you're watching from. I want to know how far these words travel. The dining room felt different without my husband. It had only been 9 days since the funeral. 9 days since I stood beside his casket, holding my breath so I wouldn't fall apart in front of people who brought casseroles and said, he's in a better place now. The table was still the same one we bought 30 years ago. Solid oak. 8 chairs, one of them empty. His chair. No one mentioned it. The pot roast had gone cold. I could smell it anyway. Onions, rosemary, something faintly burned at the edges. I had cooked it the way my husband liked, out of habit more than hope. He used to say food tasted different when it was made quietly. My daughter-in-law cleared her throat. We've been talking, she said, as if the sentence were neutral, as if it didn't rearrange the air in the room. My son nodded once. I looked at him then. At the boy I used to walk to school every morning, holding his hand across Maple Street. He wouldn't meet my eyes. A place with nurses, she continued. Activities. People your age. It's safer. Safer. That word stayed with me. I had lived in that house for 42 years, raised a child, buried a husband, paid every bill on time, fixed leaky faucets myself after my husband's hands grew unsteady. But now, apparently, I needed supervision. I didn't ask where this idea came from. I didn't ask how long they had been planning it. I pushed my chair back carefully so it wouldn't scrape the floor. I carried my plate to the sink. The water ran louder than usual, or maybe I was just listening harder. Behind me, I heard silverware clink. Normal sounds. Dinner sounds. As if nothing irreversible had just been said. Later that night, I sat alone in my bedroom. His sweater was still folded at the foot of the bed. I hadn't washed it. I hadn't moved it. It still smelled like the soap he liked. The cheap kind from the grocery store. Nothing fancy. I sat on the edge of the mattress and counted my breaths. In, out. Slow enough to keep my hands from shaking. Grief does strange things. It makes time soft around the edges. It makes people impatient with you, as if sorrow has a deadline. Downstairs, I heard my daughter-in-law laughing. A short sound, light. My son laughed too. That was when I understood something I hadn't allowed myself to see before. This wasn't about my health. This wasn't about my safety. This was about space, about control, about what comes next, now that my husband wasn't there to stand between us. I didn't cry that night. I didn't pack. I didn't argue. I lay down on my side of the bed and stared at the ceiling fan as it turned, slow and steady, just like it had for years. They thought grief had made me fragile. They were wrong. The house felt larger the morning after that dinner. Not brighter, not quieter. Just larger, the way empty places do when they stop pretending to be full. I woke up before sunrise, out of habit. My husband used to say mornings were easier if you didn't argue with them. I made coffee for 2 without thinking, then stood at the counter holding an extra mug I didn't need. I put it back in the cabinet. The kitchen clock ticked too loudly. Each second sounded deliberate, as if it were counting something down. I sat at the table and looked at the chair across from me. The one he always pulled out before sitting. The legs were slightly uneven. He used to wedge a folded napkin underneath to stop it from wobbling. The napkin was still there. I didn't move it. The house smelled the same as it always had. Cleaning spray, old wood, something faintly floral from the hand soap. But there was no other sound. No cough from the hallway. No radio humming low. No footsteps behind me. After breakfast, I walked through the living room slowly. The framed photos were still in place. Our wedding picture. My son's high school graduation. A beach trip from years ago, back when everyone still smiled without effort. I dusted the shelf beneath them, carefully. One frame tilted, and I straightened it. Upstairs, the guest room door was closed. That was new. I stood there for a moment, my hand hovering near the knob. I didn't open it. Instead, I went into my bedroom and sat at the edge of the bed. His sweater was still folded where I had left it. I ran my fingers along the sleeve once, then stopped. Grief hadn't made me forgetful. It had made me precise. Later that afternoon, my son came home early. He didn't ask how I was sleeping. He didn't mention dinner. He stood in the doorway like a visitor waiting for instructions. "There are brochures on the counter," he said. I nodded. He hesitated, then added, "They have good reviews." I didn't ask who they were. He left the room before I could say anything, not that I planned to. His footsteps moved quickly down the hall, like he was relieved to be done speaking. I stayed where I was. That evening, I sorted mail at the kitchen table. Bills, flyers, a condolence card I hadn't opened yet. I stacked them neatly, then noticed a thin envelope tucked beneath the rest. It wasn't addressed to me. It had my son's name on it. The return address was a bank I recognized. I slid it back into the pile without opening it. Dinner was quiet. My daughter-in-law spoke about schedules, appointments, next steps. Her tone stayed even, efficient. She didn't look at me when she talked. I listened. I always had. Afterward, I washed the dishes alone. The water ran hot. Steam fogged the window above the sink. I dried each plate and put it away in the same order I always had. That night, I lay awake and stared at the ceiling. The fan turned slowly, steady and patient. I matched my breathing to it. Somewhere downstairs, a door closed softly. In the dark, I made a small decision. Not out of anger, not out of fear, just clarity. They believed this was the beginning of something ending. I understood it was the opposite. The changes didn't happen all at once. They arrived quietly, the way dust settles when no one is watching. 2 mornings later, I opened the hallway closet and noticed my coat wasn't there. The one I wore every winter, navy blue, heavy buttons. I stood still for a moment, then closed the door. Later, I found it folded in a box near the stairs. The box wasn't labeled. I left it where it was. At breakfast, my son spoke without looking up from his phone. "We're rearranging a few things," he said. I nodded. My daughter-in-law added, "It'll make things easier." She smiled when she said it. Not at me, just in my direction. The house felt different now. Not empty, managed. Rooms I used to walk through freely began to feel borrowed. Doors stayed closed longer. Conversation stopped when I entered. I could feel it in the pauses, the way sentences didn't quite finish. One afternoon, I reached for the small wooden box I kept in the living room drawer. The one with our documents, insurance papers, old letters, my husband's handwriting on the envelopes. The drawer was locked. I stood there longer than necessary, my fingers resting on the handle. Then I stepped back. That evening, my daughter-in-law set a folder on the table. "Just information," she said. "Nothing urgent." I didn't open it. Inside, I could see the edges of brochures, smiling seniors, garden paths, clean hallways, words like care and comfort printed in soft colors. My son watched me closely, as if waiting for something. I finished my tea and carried the cup to the sink. Later, while folding laundry, I noticed half the hangers in my closet were gone. My dresses were pressed closer together now, as if making room. For what? I didn't ask. That night, I woke to the sound of voices downstairs. Low, careful. I stayed where I was and listened to the floorboards settle. I didn't need the words to understand the tone. The next day, the locks on the back door were different. New, shiny. My key still worked, but it turned more slowly, like it didn't recognize me right away. I took note of that. In the afternoon, a woman I didn't know walked through the living room with my daughter-in-law. She carried a clipboard. She looked around, nodding, making small marks on paper. "This space is fine," she said. "Temporary." Temporary. No one introduced me. When they left, the house was quiet again. I sat at the table and looked at the chair across from me, my husband's chair. Still empty. Still untouched. No one had tried to move it. Yet. That evening, my son spoke again. "We're just trying to plan ahead," he said. I nodded once. My daughter-in-law smiled, satisfied, as if agreement had been reached. I washed the dishes by hand and dried them slowly, plate by plate. I lined them up exactly the way I always had. In my room, I opened the nightstand drawer and checked what was inside. My wedding ring, a small notebook, cash I had set aside years ago and never spent. Everything was still there. I closed the drawer and lay down. They thought I hadn't noticed, but I had. Every lock, every box, every word that didn't include me. I didn't say anything. I was listening. That night, I dreamed of my husband's hands. They were steady in the dream. Warm, the way they used to be before illness made them tremble. He was standing in the garage, tightening a loose screw on a chair, the same chair now sitting empty at the table. "Don't rush things," he said without looking at me. I woke up before he finished the sentence. The house was quiet again. Morning light slipped through the curtains, pale and careful, like it didn't want to disturb anything. I lay still for a moment, listening. Nothing moved. When I got up, I made the bed the way I always had. Smooth corners, pillow straight, his side untouched. I found myself standing in the hallway, looking at the wall where we used to mark our son's height with pencil lines. They were still there, faded, but visible. I traced one line with my finger, then lowered my hand. My husband used to stand behind me when I cleaned, leaning against the doorway. He'd say I didn't need to polish what was already solid, that some things held without effort. You don't have to prove anything, he used to tell me. You already belong. At breakfast, my daughter-in-law rearranged the table settings. She moved my place an inch to the side so a folder would fit in the center. I watched her do it. Precise. Casual. My son stood by the window, scrolling on his phone. No one asked if I wanted eggs. After they left for the day, I walked into the study. My husband's study. The door was still unlocked. For now. The desk looked the same. Paper stacked neatly. A pen resting exactly where he always left it. I opened the bottom drawer and found the old envelope tied with string, the one he kept apart from the others. Inside were copies of documents, notes in his handwriting, dates circled, names underlined. He had always been quiet about these things. Not secretive, just careful. I didn't take the papers out. I didn't read them. I closed the drawer and locked it the way he had taught me to. That afternoon, I sat in the living room and looked at our wedding photo. We were younger then, standing too close, smiling without restraint. He had leaned toward me as if the room were tilted. I remembered how he used to correct people gently when they spoke over me, how he waited until I finished before answering a question himself, how he never made decisions without saying, "Let me check with her." He believed in balance, in order, in time. When he got sick, he worried about leaving things unfinished. Not money, not property, people. "Promise me you won't disappear," he said once, his voice low, tired, "no matter what they say." I had promised. That evening my son mentioned his father in passing. Just a sentence. Something about how Dad would understand. I looked at him then. Really looked. He didn't know what his father would have understood. He hadn't been listening long enough. After dinner, I returned to my room and sat on the bed. I took off my wedding ring and placed it in the nightstand drawer beside the notebook. I closed the drawer gently. The house settled around me. Pipes ticking, wood contracting, familiar sounds. They thought his absence had left a gap they could fill. They didn't realize he had already prepared me, not with instructions, with steadiness. And I was still here. By the fifth day, the plan stopped pretending to be subtle. I was in the laundry room when I heard my name. Not called, used. My daughter-in-law's voice carried from the kitchen, measured and low, like she was discussing furniture. "She'll need help," she said. "Full-time." My son answered quietly. I couldn't hear the words, only the pause afterward, the kind that means agreement without commitment. I finished folding the towel in my hands, smoothed the edge, placed it on the stack. When I stepped into the kitchen, the conversation ended. Too quickly. My daughter-in-law reached for her coffee as if nothing had been said. "We were just talking logistics," she offered. I nodded. On the counter, next to the fruit bowl, was a notepad I hadn't seen before. A list written in her handwriting. Bullet points, short phrases, tour schedule, doctor paperwork, room availability. I didn't read past that. That afternoon, a car pulled into the driveway. Not the clipboard woman this time. A man in a blazer stepped out, holding a folder under his arm. He smiled when my daughter-in-law opened the door. "Good afternoon," he said. "I'm here to follow up." Follow up. They sat in the living room. I stayed in the hallway, just out of sight. The man spoke about timelines, about transitions, about how families often find this stage difficult. No one corrected him. My daughter-in-law nodded along, occasionally glancing toward the hallway, as if checking whether I was listening. I was. He left after 20 minutes. When the door closed, the house felt smaller again. Pressed inward, my son cleared his throat. "We'll talk later," he said. Later never had a date. That evening, I went through the small filing cabinet in my bedroom. Slowly, methodically. Birth certificates, old tax returns, insurance policies. The order hadn't changed, but something felt off. One folder was thinner than it should have been. I didn't search for what was missing. I knew better than to rush clarity. At dinner, my daughter-in-law spoke about timing, about how waiting too long makes everything harder. She used the same tone she used when planning vacations. Efficient, cheerful. I chewed carefully, swallowed. My son watched his plate. Afterward, I stepped outside onto the back porch. The air was cool. The yard looked the same as it always had. Trimmed hedges, the bird feeder my husband built still hanging from the maple tree. He used to refill it every Sunday morning. Said birds noticed consistency. Behind me, the door opened. My daughter-in-law joined me, keeping a polite distance. "We just want what's best," she said. I didn't respond. She shifted her weight, uncomfortable with the silence. "You'll have your own room. Your things." "My things." She went back inside before I could answer. That night, I sat at the desk in my room and opened the notebook from the drawer. I hadn't written in it for years. The pages were blank, except for a few notes in my husband's handwriting near the back. Dates, names, crossed out figures. I read them once, then again. Downstairs, I heard laughter. A television show. Normal sounds. They believed everything important was happening without me. They believed grief had narrowed my focus. They were wrong. I closed the notebook and returned it to the drawer. I locked it. Then I turned off the light and lay down, my hands folded neatly on my chest, listening to the house breathe around me. The plan was moving forward. So was I. By the 6th day, the pattern was impossible to miss. I was no longer asked. I was informed. A note appeared on the refrigerator that morning, written neatly, blue ink, appointment moved to Thursday, paperwork almost complete, no signature. I made myself toast and ate it standing at the counter. The bread was a little burnt. I ate it anyway. My son left early. He paused at the door, keys in hand, as if he meant to say something. He didn't. The door closed behind him with a soft, final click. I washed my plate and dried it immediately. I noticed my drying towel was gone, replaced with a thinner one, less worn. Later, I went to the living room to sit by the window. The armchair I used every afternoon had been moved slightly. Not far, just enough to change the angle of the light. I adjusted it back. In the hallway, I overheard my daughter-in-law on the phone. Her voice was calm, professional. "Yes, she's agreeable," she said. "No resistance." I stopped walking. "She understands it's temporary," she continued. "We're doing this the right way." The right way. I waited until the call ended before stepping into view. She startled slightly when she saw me, then smiled as if nothing had happened. "I was just confirming details," she said. I nodded. That afternoon, a neighbor stopped by with a sympathy card. She held my hands a moment longer than usual, looked past me into the house. "Are you holding up?" she asked. "I'm fine," I said. She hesitated. "If you need anything." "I know," I said. After she left, I placed the card on the mantel without opening it. The mantel was already crowded with flowers that were beginning to wilt. No one had thrown them away yet. In the evening, I went through my dresser drawers. Slowly, I counted what was there, what was missing. I folded everything back exactly as I found it. Dinner was quieter than usual. My daughter-in-law spoke about weather, about traffic, small things. My son listened, nodding occasionally. No one mentioned me. Afterward, I stood at the sink and washed the dishes while they sat at the table. Their voices blurred together behind me. Comfortable, familiar. I dried my hands and turned around. "Thursday," my son said finally. "We'll go together." I nodded once. That night, I didn't sleep right away. I lay on my back, staring at the ceiling, counting the turns of the fan. My thoughts moved steadily, without panic. I remembered birthdays I had planned, appointments I had managed, crises I had handled quietly while others panicked. I remembered how often I had been told, "You're so good at handling things." I got out of bed and opened the nightstand drawer. The notebook was there, the cash, the ring, everything accounted for. I closed the drawer and locked it. Downstairs, a light turned off. The house settled. They believed my silence meant surrender. They believed agreement meant consent. They believed time was working in their favor. In the dark, I rested my hands on my stomach and breathed evenly. I wasn't being carried along. I was letting them move first, and I was keeping count. On the 7th day, someone else noticed. It happened in the late afternoon when the house was quiet and my daughter-in-law was out running errands. I was in the living room, seated near the window, folding a cardigan that no longer fit the season. The doorbell rang. I didn't rush. I never had. I stood up carefully and walked to the door. It was Helen. She had been my husband's friend long before she was mine. They worked together for years. sat beside each other at town meetings, argued gently about small things, and agreed on the important ones. She held a paper bag in one hand and her purse in the other. "I was in the neighborhood," she said. "Thought you might not feel like cooking." I stepped aside and let her in. She looked around as she walked past me. Not rudely, just observant. Her eyes paused on the brochures stacked neatly on the side table, on the folder resting where a vase used to be. She didn't comment. We sat in the kitchen. She placed the bag on the counter and unpacked soup into bowls, the kind my husband liked, thick, practical. "You look tired," she said. "I am," I answered. That was all. She stirred her soup slowly, then glanced at the hallway. "Is your son home?" "No." She nodded once, thought about that. After a few minutes, she spoke again. "Your husband worried about this house." I didn't respond. "Not the repairs," she added. "The people." I lifted my spoon and set it down again. "He asked me to keep an eye on things," she said, "in case you needed help with paperwork or questions." Paperwork. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small envelope. She didn't slide it across the table. She placed it gently near my hand. "I didn't open this," she said. "It came to my office by mistake." I didn't touch it. Inside, I could see the edge of a document. Typed, official. "He trusted you," she continued. "You know that." I nodded. We finished eating in silence. She washed her bowl and dried it before I could stop her. Old habits. At the door, she paused. "If you need me," she said, "I'm around." After she left, I stood in the kitchen for a long time. The envelope stayed where it was. I didn't open it. Not yet. That evening, my son came home late. He mentioned Helen casually, as if testing something. "She stopped by?" he asked. "Yes." He hesitated. "Everything okay?" "Yes." He seemed relieved by that answer. My daughter-in-law returned shortly after. She noticed the empty bowls in the sink. "Company?" she asked. "A friend," I said. She smiled tightly. "That's nice." Later, when the house was quiet again, I went to my room and opened the nightstand drawer. I took out the notebook and placed it beside the envelope Helen had left. I didn't read either one. I stacked them neatly, parallel, balanced. Downstairs, the television murmured, laughter from a show I wasn't watching. I lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling. The fan turned slowly, counting time in its own way. They believed everything important was happening between themselves. They hadn't considered witnesses. They hadn't considered memory. They hadn't considered the people who knew my husband when he was still strong and trusted his judgment when he wasn't. I closed my eyes and rested my hands on my stomach. I wasn't alone in this house. I just hadn't spoken yet. By the 8th day, I stopped waiting for things to happen to me. I began to notice how easily silence could be used, how it made people careless. That morning, I dressed more carefully than usual. Nothing formal, just deliberate. I brushed my hair slowly and chose the cardigan my husband liked, the gray one with the loose sleeves. I buttoned it all the way up. Downstairs, my daughter-in-law was already on the phone. She paced as she spoke, her voice lowered but confident. "Yes," she said. "She's been calm, very cooperative." I poured myself coffee and sat at the table. She glanced at me briefly, then turned away, continuing her call. "Thursday should be fine," she added. "We're almost there." Almost. After she left the room, I opened the envelope Helen had brought, just enough to confirm what it was. I didn't read every line. I didn't need to. Names, dates, a signature I recognized. I folded the paper carefully and placed it back inside. That afternoon, I went through the house with new eyes. I noted which drawers had been reorganized, which cabinets now held things that weren't mine, which shelves had been cleared. Not everything had been moved, only the things that mattered to them. I returned to my room and opened the notebook again. This time, I read it fully. My husband's handwriting was steady, his notes precise. He had anticipated questions I hadn't known to ask yet. He had never been dramatic. He believed in preparation. I closed the notebook and replaced it in the drawer. In the early evening, my son knocked on my door. He waited for my answer before opening it, something he hadn't done in years. "We should talk," he said. I looked at him. "Tomorrow," he added. "Before Thursday." I nodded. He seemed relieved by that, as if agreement had been reached. He didn't stay. Later at dinner, my daughter-in-law spoke more than usual. She talked about schedules and checklists, about how everything would fall into place. I ate slowly. I listened. When I finished, I stood up and carried my plate to the sink. My hands didn't shake. That night, I didn't lie awake. I slept. In the morning, I woke with a sense of order. I showered. I dressed. I opened the curtains and let the light in fully. Downstairs, the house sounded different, expectant. I sat at the table and waited. They thought I had accepted their direction. They thought my calm meant compliance. They thought grief had softened my edges. They didn't know I had already chosen what I would carry with me and what I would leave behind. I finished my coffee and placed the cup in the sink. Thursday was coming. So was the truth. Thursday arrived without ceremony. No alarm, no announcement, just light through the curtains and the sound of movement downstairs. Cabinets opening, footsteps purposeful. I dressed quietly and joined them at the table. My daughter-in-law had already arranged the folders, neat stacks, color-coded tabs. She slid one toward me without a word. My son sat beside her, hands folded, eyes fixed on the surface of the table. "This is just to make things official," she said. Her voice was calm, reassuring, the kind used with strangers. I didn't open the folder. She continued anyway. "It's temporary until everything settles." My son nodded once. I looked at him. He didn't look back. Outside, a car pulled into the driveway. I recognized the sound of the engine before I saw it through the window. The same one from earlier in the week. The man in the blazer. My daughter-in-law stood. "They're right on time. Right on time." She turned to me with a practiced smile. "We'll just go over a few things. No pressure. No pressure." The man entered with a clipboard and a polite nod. He spoke as if we'd met before, as if we were already in agreement. He talked about transitions, about comfort, about how families often wait too long. I listened. My daughter-in-law watched my face closely, as if waiting for it to change. It didn't. At one point, the man looked directly at me. "Do you have any questions?" I shook my head. That seemed to satisfy him. My son exhaled almost imperceptibly. The man packed up his papers and left as efficiently as he'd arrived. The door closed behind him with a sound that lingered. My daughter-in-law slid a pen across the table. It stopped just short of my hand. "Whenever you're ready," she said. I picked it up. They both leaned forward slightly, hopeful, certain. I held the pen for a moment, felt its weight. Then I placed it back down where it had been. "I'll need a few hours," I said. My voice surprised them. Not because it was loud, because it was steady. My son frowned. "Mom, tonight," I added. They exchanged a glance, a silent calculation. "That's fine," my daughter-in-law said quickly. "Of course." I stood and carried my mug to the sink, rinsed it, dried it, put it away. In my room, I sat at the desk and opened the nightstand drawer. I removed the notebook, the envelope. I laid them side by side. Everything I needed was already there. Downstairs, I heard them talking again. Lower voices now. Confident. "She didn't resist," my daughter-in-law said. "She never does," my son replied. I closed the drawer. That afternoon, I packed a small bag. Not clothes, papers, the things that couldn't be replaced. As evening settled in, I returned to the living room and sat in my chair. The one they hadn't moved yet. They watched me from the kitchen doorway. I met their eyes calmly. "Tonight, Tat," I said again. They nodded. They believed the decision had already been made. They believed I was buying time to say goodbye. They didn't understand that time was something I already had, and I was done giving it away. That evening, I asked them to sit down. Not at the dining table, in the living room. The folders were still stacked where my daughter-in-law had left them. I didn't touch them. I sat in my chair and waited until they took the sofa across from me. My son looked uneasy. My daughter-in-law crossed her legs, composed. "I went through some things today," I said. They both leaned in slightly. "Paperwork," I added. "Old things." My daughter-in-law smiled. "That's good. It can be overwhelming if you wait too long." I reached for the envelope Helen had brought days earlier. I placed it on the coffee table between us. Flat, centered. My son stared at it. He recognized the return address. "I didn't open this right away," I said. "I wanted to be sure of what I was holding." My daughter-in-law's smile tightened. She didn't speak. I slid the envelope toward my son. He opened it carefully. His face changed as he read. Not dramatically, just enough. "What is this?" he asked. "Something your father arranged," I said, quietly. My daughter-in-law leaned forward. "This doesn't change anything," she said quickly. "We've already—" I raised my hand once. She stopped. "There's more," I said. I took out the notebook next, the one from the drawer. I placed it beside the envelope. My son opened it, turned a few pages. Slower now. The room felt still, heavy, This isn't, he began. It is, I said. My daughter-in-law shifted in her seat. You should have told us, she said. We could have handled this differently. I looked at her. You were already handling it, I said. Silence followed. My son closed the notebook and rubbed his forehead. Dad never mentioned this. He didn't need to, I said. He mentioned it to the people who would listen. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't explain further. The folders on the table suddenly looked out of place, smaller. My daughter-in-law reached for one, then stopped herself. She folded her hands instead. So what now? She asked. I leaned back in my chair. Now, I said, we pause. My son looked at me, really looked, for the first time in days. You knew, he said quietly. I paid attention, I replied. The clock on the wall ticked loudly. Each second felt deliberate. My daughter-in-law stood up, walked to the window, looked out into the dark yard as if searching for something that wasn't there. We were trying to help, she said without turning around. I didn't answer. After a moment, she returned to the sofa and sat down. Her movements were less certain now. I gathered the envelope and the notebook and held them in my lap. Nothing is happening tonight, I said. My son nodded slowly. The certainty they had carried all week was gone, replaced by something thinner, fragile. I stood up and carried the documents back to my room. I placed them in the drawer and locked it. When I returned to the living room, they were still sitting there, quiet, waiting. I turned off the lamp beside my chair. I'm going to bed, I said. No one stopped me. That night, I slept deeply. Downstairs, the house was silent. The plan they had been so confident in no longer belonged to them, and they knew it. The next morning, no one rushed. My daughter-in-law didn't touch the folders. My son didn't mention Thursday. The house moved more slowly, as if it were unsure which direction to take. I woke early, as I always had, and made coffee. 1 cup. Then another. I carried the second mug to the table and sat down with it, though no one joined me. When my son came into the kitchen, he stopped short when he saw me already seated. Morning, he said. Morning, I replied. He reached for the cabinet, then hesitated. We should talk today, he said. I nodded. Later, my daughter-in-law joined us. She dressed carefully, her hair neat, her movements measured. She placed her phone face down on the counter. We've been thinking, she began. I didn't answer. My son cleared his throat. Dad wouldn't want tension, he said. I looked at him. He also wouldn't want things done behind my back, I said. The words sat between us. Calm. Undeniable. My daughter-in-law exhaled. We thought we were doing what was necessary. You decided, I said. That's different. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. We moved to the living room, not at my request. They followed. I sat in my chair. They took the sofa again, closer this time, as if distance no longer felt safe. I'm not going anywhere, I said. My son nodded slowly. I understand. It sounded practiced. I won't sign anything, I added. I understand, he said again. My daughter-in-law folded her hands tightly in her lap. This complicates things, she said. It clarifies them, I replied. Silence followed, not the uncomfortable kind, the kind that settles after something has been named. I need time, my son said. So do I answered. That afternoon, they left the house together. No errands mentioned. No timeline offered. I stayed. I opened windows, let air move through rooms that had felt closed all week. I rearranged nothing. I cleaned nothing. I simply walked through the house as I always had. When they returned, they were quieter. At dinner, no one spoke about plans. My daughter-in-law asked if the soup needed more salt. I shook my head. My son ate slowly, thoughtfully. Afterward, I stood and gathered the dishes. My daughter-in-law stood too, then stopped. She sat back down. I washed the plates alone. That night, my son knocked on my door. Mom, he said softly. I opened it. I didn't see it, he said. Not clearly. I stepped aside so he could see the room. His father's sweater folded, the lamp on, everything in its place. You see it now, I said. He nodded once. I'm staying, I added. I know, he said. He left without saying more. I closed the door and sat on the bed. I didn't reach for the drawer. I didn't check the lock. Downstairs, the television stayed off. No laughter. No phone calls. The house rested into a new shape. They no longer spoke around me. They spoke carefully, and that was enough. The house found its rhythm again. Not the old one, a quieter one. Mornings returned to simple sounds. Coffee brewing, the clock ticking, light moving across the floor. No folders on the table. No whispers in the hallway. No appointments written on the refrigerator. I stayed, not because I fought, Not because I demanded, because I didn't move. My daughter-in-law stopped rearranging things that weren't hers. She still spoke carefully, choosing her words as if they carried weight now. Sometimes she watched me when she thought I wasn't looking. I didn't comment. My son changed too. He began to sit across from me at breakfast again. Not every day, but often enough. When he spoke, he waited for my answer. Once he fixed the loose hinge on the back door. He didn't mention it afterward. The brochures disappeared. I found them one morning in the recycling bin, folded neatly as if even that needed to be done properly. I left them there. One afternoon, I carried my husband's sweater downstairs and placed it over the back of his chair. Not as a symbol, just because it belonged there. No one objected. Weeks passed. The house adjusted to the truth it had been avoiding. That I wasn't temporary, that grief hadn't erased me, that silence wasn't permission. I visited the garden again, pulled a few weeds, refilled the bird feeder. The birds returned quickly. They always do when something familiar remains. Helen stopped by once more. We drank tea in the kitchen. She looked around and smiled, subtle and knowing. "You're steady," she said. "I learned from him," I answered. That night, I sat alone in the living room with the lamp on low. I opened the nightstand drawer and took out my wedding ring. I turned it in my fingers, then slipped it back on. Not because I missed what was gone, because I remembered what stayed. I didn't need apologies. I didn't need explanations. What I needed was space and time and the right to remain. They had mistaken grief for weakness, silence for surrender, stillness for absence. They were wrong. I was never disappearing. I was watching, I was remembering, I was standing exactly where I belonged. And in the end, that was enough. The house knew it. So did they.